Thanks, Max, for the introduction and for the opportunity to be with you today. This is a crazy time, but I'm really happy to have the chance to speak to you all virtually. Technology like Zoom has allowed me to meet with people all over the world without those long plane flights and the associated jet lag. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the benefits of circular supply chains. If you don't know it, I'll give you a good introduction, and if you know a little bit, we'll maybe hopefully expand on that. So here in the US, we have estate sales, or a lot of us shop in thrift stores. In my travels, I've seen similar forms of commerce all around the world. I like to shop in this way. When I was in college, it was pretty much all I could afford. But now I like the thrill of finding that treasure in what someone else gave away. Don't you guys like that too? Forays to local shops like this and to estate sales for homes are a great way to furnish a home. And many of my friends have saved a ton of money on baby items, kids' clothes, kids' toys. These used items are really great. They can help people that are creative decorate with their own distinctive flair, and maybe they can just help them find a unique gift for someone that you love. Circular supply chains are pretty much on those same lines. So we don't have a lot of time today, but I'm going to talk about how supply chains are different, circular versus linear. We're going to look at why they matter so much. They matter a lot now, but you're going to see they're going to matter even more in the future. We're going to talk about some barriers, some enablers, and some benefits of circular supply chains. I'll show you a couple of success stories where companies are really benefiting from this, and I'm going to talk about why this is the way to move forward and there's a better way to do that. So we're going to start with the goal of circular supply chains, which is really to reduce the amount of municipal solid waste that's generated and processed around the world. We're talking about material that gets discarded from commercial and residential resources, bottles, boxes, crates, and then food, grass clippings, yard waste. We're going to talk about sofas and computers and old furniture, tires, refrigerators, all of your old TVs and stereo systems. All of that goes into what we call municipal solid waste, and that's measured and monitored around the world. The MSW does not include the construction and the demolition debris when you tear down an old building to put a new one up. It also doesn't include hazardous industrial waste or wastewater. So there are things that aren't in this, but you can see that in a second that this has a lot of volume around the world. We use several different methodologies to handle this. We reuse it, we recycle it. If it's grass clippings and yard waste, we compost it. We use combustion with energy recovery, we burn it, and we get some energy out of that. And then landfills, which are located around the world. Today, we generate over 2 billion tons of MSW annually around the world. A third of this is not managed in what we consider a really environmentally safe manner. So I'm not an academic, but I always like to know where I'm starting from. This research tells me that we've got a big problem right now. And so that's why I'm spending a couple minutes on these statistics. When we look at the fact that 2 billion tons are generated annually, and a third of that is not environmentally safe. And by the way, that 33% is a pretty conservative number. So we're generating today, on average, 3/4 of a kilogram every day per person. We're generating this MSW. And though that ranges in different countries from as low as about 1/10 of a kilogram to 4.5 kilograms per person per day in some areas. What we find is the high income countries bear most of the responsibility for generating this, and 16% of the world's population is in this high income that generate 34% of the MSW. It's 683 or so million tons of this annually that get generated. And if it's bad now, look at the projections for 2050. They're saying this 2 million that we're generating today is going to be 3.4 billion tons a year. And that's more than double the projected population growth rate that we're seeing for that. So we're going to generate more waste, way more per capita than we do today. So we showed that there's a correlation between the income level and the amount of waste generated. Let me show you where that comes from. The East Asia Pacific region generates about 23% of that, and that's the highest percent for one area in the globe. The smallest region of generated waste is the Middle East and North Africa area. They only generate about 6% of the world's MSW. By 2050, the projections say that daily waste per capita is going to increase over 19%, almost 20% over what we do today. Middle income countries, their increased waste is supposed to be 40% over the numbers that it is today. For low income countries, it's expected to triple. And sub-Saharan Africa, which is a low area today, again, that's expected to triple in the next 30 years. South Asia and Middle East and North Africa, those areas are expected to double in the amount of waste that they generate, the MSW they generate. And in these two regions, today, more than half of what they generate is openly dumped. And these trajectories of growth have vast implications for the environment, for our health, for the prosperity of the countries that are in those areas and around the world. So this really requires some urgent action to change these trajectories and change these projections. So I'm going to talk a little bit about linear versus circular supply chains. To not stay on this path that we're on, we're going to have to do some things differently as individuals and as companies. Gartner and Accenture did some surveys in early 2020 that indicated that up to 90% of large companies had plans to implement circular business models and circular supply chains. Many companies had their 2020 plans derailed very early in February and March when we found this thing we call coronavirus, COVID-19, the pandemic. So that's changed a lot of what people were going to do and companies were going to do last year, but I think it's going to come back. So now in 2021, some areas are in better control than others, but as soon as we get past the pandemic, companies are going to be again looking at things like circular supply chain, circular business models to help them manage their companies. Linear supply chains are the ones that we're most familiar with. That's where we take the tier 2 suppliers that go to the tier 1 suppliers. We have producers, manufacturers, we have retailers, and ultimately we have consumers. And we've got cash flowing through there and products flowing through there and all kinds of different things going back and forth, mostly one way, but there's some information and cash that's going backwards too in that. So that's the linear supply chain. We have old products that when they run out of their useful life, they're discarded. And a lot of that today ends up in landfills. We do some recycling, we do some reclaiming, we might do some reusing, but a lot of it still goes into landfills. And then all along as those parts and those assemblies are getting created, there's off-fall in a lot of the process areas. So think about if you have a big sheet of sheet metal and you're stamping parts out of it. You get the parts that you need and everything else is scrap. If you make plastic parts, you've got runners and you've got extra material there that you don't need that gets clipped away and that gets reground or that goes to scrap. So there's a lot of that kind of thing. And cables, if you use a lot of copper wire, we snip, 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 cut that clean, put that up. So there's a lot of off-fall that gets done. Some companies are better than others at doing that, but that's just a start into what we call circular supply chains. In the circular supply chains, raw materials that are remnants from one area become inputs for another. We recycle material back into the manufacturing operations, not necessarily for the same product, could be, but we're looking at other products as well. We're reusing, repurposing, and we're trying to make material that's an output of one or an excess of one become an input to another product or process. So what we want is that very little, if anything, goes to waste. Circular supply chains eliminate this waste. They make traditional outputs into inputs for another product or process by changing the way we handle that. For example, we can use gold, glass, copper, and lots of other metals from an old cell phone, and we can collect that, remanufacture that, and put that into new products. It also includes techniques like we're seeing some of the aircraft manufacturers use, where they're leasing the jet engines from the company that manufactures them. General Electric makes jet engines, and sometimes now they're not selling those engines, they're leasing them. They're long-term leases, and the company that takes ownership of that or takes possession of that engine does all the maintenance and is responsible for maintaining that and making sure that that has the life expectancy that it's intended. But when that process is finished and that jet engine no longer works or has reached the end of its useful life, it goes back to General Electric. And General Electric takes it apart, and it takes those parts and uses them for other parts for repair, or they take them, melt them down, and make working with their suppliers, they make new parts for new jet engines. So it's a different model than it was before. It's not just selling it and expecting the consumer to take care of it. It's a long-term lease with the responsibility for handling that material going back to the manufacturer who knows exactly what's in it, where it came from, and how to deal with it. So these circular supply chains matter because they help reduce that amount of MSW that we looked at on the projections. We looked at where we are now with 2 billion going to 3.4 billion. We'd like to reduce that. And the number of times we handle all the things that go in there also adds. So this conference, we're talking about inventory and logistics. We can reduce those costs by handling things fewer times, by making things not go into recycle waste, landfills, and things like that. That saves us both time and money. It helps reduce our inventory levels, and it really helps keep more dollars on the bottom line for the company. And it addresses customers that are looking for and asking manufacturers to provide more environmentally friendly products. So there are some barriers to circular supply chains. This sorting, recapturing, reusing, recycling, remanufacturing may not be in-house capabilities for a lot of companies. So they may require 3PLs in order to do that. If so, then that's something that you've got to invest in, and you've got to find the right 3PLs that can help you make those goals. You have to sell things that are not new, but you have to sell them as good as new. So you want to offer the same warranty, the same service level for new parts as you do for the things that are refurbed or remanufactured. There are some corporate barriers a couple different ways. That in order to do circular supply chains, you've got to have a lot of cross-functional collaboration internally within the company, and that has to be with your internal stakeholders. And then you also have to have a lot of collaboration with your suppliers and sometimes your customers. So that external collaboration is important. You have to have a lot of leadership for this because it does take a new way of thinking, a new way of doing this, a new way of handling supply chains. And that leadership has to come from the top of the organization. It has to be the senior executives that say, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do this, and help the company move in that direction. And then to measure where you are and how far you've come, you've got to get some new metrics. You look at things like take back quantity. And this is not what you return, but this is how much of this material you take back into your process. You can look at percent of reused or refurbished material within a process line. And you can look at your productivity, how you measure the productivity of your resources. Output versus input is how we measure productivity. So you want to look at the resource productivity as well as your process lines and your other traditional ways of manufacturing that. And then if you can't leverage the technology that's available, there is some great new technology that's helping companies make circular supply chains, and we'll take a look at those because those are enablers. But if you're unable to take advantage of those, that can be a barrier. So government entities are acting right now to increase the regulations, and our consumers are demanding more sustainable, more environmentally friendly products. So the way we have to handle this in the future is going to get more strict and more regulated across the globe. We want to look at some of these technologies that I just mentioned, things like blockchain. 3D printing is helping a lot in these areas. Machine learning is one, Internet of Things. There's some biometrics that they're using in the medical industry and research areas. And again, collaboration and communication in a different way, expanding that you're doing today. So if you want to think about supply chains, the Deloitte University Press says circular supply chains are similar to a spider web. So we just looked at the linear model a couple of slides ago, and now we're saying that we don't have that. That really our enablers are looking at this as a spider web with all of these different links. So relationships become increasingly complex throughout that supply chain with the manufacturers, with the suppliers, with the customers, with all the different pieces of the supply chain that are helping to make that circle of this material so that we don't have any waste. As a result, we have these increasingly complex relationships, and trying to track those is pretty impractical if it's not really impossible. So you want to learn these new technologies like blockchain, Internet of Things, and use the AI that you can to help transform supply chains. There are some benefits of circular supply chains. What we find is that when we use materials refurbished and recycled, when we incorporate those into new good production, we reduce the cost. When we connect the end of one product supply chain to the beginning of another, we save money and we save time. Consumers, we find, are really willing to pay more for goods they deem sustainable. Studies have found that over 70% of millennials are in this category. They say in all these surveys, yes, they are willing to pay more for goods that are sustainable or environmentally friendly. So if you want to stay relevant in your market share, grow your market share, stay relevant with your market, then you want to be conscious of these trends and understand that maybe they are willing to pay more for this. What we do know is that virgin material costs more. So material that's the first time use costs more. And we see more volatility with the pricing of that material than we do with recycled or reused material. So if we can incorporate reused and recycled material into production, we can manage and reduce our total expenditure, and we better manage these costs over a longer period of time. So we find that these regulations are increasing, and we find that companies want to differentiate their brands based on being able to use these techniques. I'll give you a couple examples. Nike has a reuse a shoe program. When the malls were open freely here in the United States, you could walk into almost any mall in the country and there was a Nike store or a store that sold Nikes. And you could take your old shoes in there, drop them off, buy a new pair of shoes, and Nike would take those shoes, they would grind them up, put them into what they called grind material, and they use this material in new shoe manufacture. And these shoes are made all over the world. Primarily, these shoes are made in Asia, but they're sold all over the world. So by doing this, Nike was able to reduce the landfill volumes of old shoes that we go through. If any of you are athletes and do a lot of running or play a lot of tennis, you know you go through shoes really very quickly. Tennis shoes, play basketball players, they go through a lot of shoes. So it saves Nike money. It saves the consumer what to do with the old shoes. You feel better about putting them in the Nike store than just throwing them in the trash. And it enhances Nike's brand. So they found that this is a win-win situation. Adidas does a similar thing with shoes that they make, but they do this with lots of athletic goods. They're making 11 million shoes out of recycled plastic. That big island of plastic in the Pacific, they are working with companies that are pulling that plastic in. They're taking it out of the ocean, taking it and recycling that plastic, and Adidas is making shoes of that. They have a whole line of shoes that's made with this plastic, and that product line by itself is on track to make $1 billion for Adidas this year, last year. So that's growing very strong, very well received in the marketplace. Renault and Caterpillar are looking at the same as new parts. So they're selling parts at discounts that are reused, refurbished, and things like that with the same guarantees and warranties as new products. And they found that they're designing differently because they're designing for disassembly, and that reduces the cost of new items as well. Dell is taking plastic from parts that they've made, whether it's monitors or keyboards or whatever, they're regrinding the plastic, putting in a new, and they're achieving significant savings. So what I know for sure is there's a better way to manage our supply chains. The circular model is a great way to reduce the cost and promote sustainability. It helps us manage cost. It takes a little creativity and a look at the bigger picture, but this is really viewing waste as an opportunity and helping companies better satisfy their goals. So now you know the basics, but I know that supply chains initiatives like this are not easy to communicate or bring into your organization. So if I've piqued your interest in circular supply chains, I'm going to give you a way to look at this in a little more broadly. If you're like me, you go to these talks and then you get back to the office and you forget and you realize that you really don't have a way to help your organization implement these things. So if that's so, I'm here to help. I'm going to give you two ways to do that. You can either send me an email to jane@purplelink.co, put the word optimize in the subject. And if you do that, I'll send you the slides from this presentation, and I'll also sign you up for my bi-weekly webinars. If you'd rather just have a quick call with me, you can just do callwithjane.com. That gives you my calendar, and we can talk about how we can work to help your organization implement some of these or other supply chain initiatives. So please do that today. I'm going to leave you with this. One man's trash is another man's treasure. This is an old English proverb. And what we find is when we look at trash as an opportunity and not just as something to be hidden or moved away, we better satisfy our company's goals and better satisfy our own personal goals. So thanks very much. And now I'll take questions.